Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about how to find the percent of a number. We'll talk about what a percent is, as well as two different types of ways to find percents of a number. Finding a specific given percent of a number that's also given, as well as learning how to find out what percent one number is of another number. So first, let's dive into talking about what a percent is. If you've been learning about fractions, you'll know that a percent is a way of comparing two different quantities. Percents are always expressed in terms of 100, so we could write that expression as some number, x, over 100. For example, I could write the number 30% as 30 over 100. These two quantities are the same thing. In short, a percentage is a way of comparing one number to another number, where the first number represents a part of the whole of the other number. So let's take an example. If I said that I have 3 apples, and I know that I have, or that there are 5 apples total, then I can express that as a percentage being 3 out of 5, or rather as a fraction of 3 out of 5. Now, how do I find that as a percent? Well, one way would be to convert it into a decimal. I can do the number 3 divided by 5. And if I do the math, I will get a number like 0.60. Once it's a decimal, I can multiply that number by 100. And that will give me the number 60, or 60%. So in this way, I can tell that 3 apples represents 60% of 5 apples. Let's take a look at another example. We want to find the percent of a number that's given. In this kind of a problem, both the percent and the number that I want to find the percent of are given to me. So if I want to find 30% of 10, there's a couple of different ways that I can approach this problem. One of the easiest ways is to turn that percentage into a decimal. So to turn 30% into a decimal, I can divide by 100. This goes the same way with any kind of percentage. If I want to go from a percent to a decimal, I can divide by 100. And if I want to go from a decimal to a percentage, I can multiply the number by 100. Once I get this number here, I can actually do the math with it either on paper or in a calculator. And so with the 0.30, I'm going to multiply it by 10. So whenever we want to find a percentage, we're always going to multiply that number. We never end up dividing or anything like that. So 0 times 0 is 0. 0 times 1 is 0. We're going to add a 0 because we're moving to our next digit. 3 times 0 is 0. And 3 times 1 is 0. So this gives me 300, but remember that with decimals, I count up the number of digits after my decimal point. In this case, I have 2. So I'm going to move my decimal 2 places. So this tells me that 3 is 30% of the number 10. One other way that I can go about doing this is to represent this as a fraction as well. Remember here how I mentioned that 30% is the same thing as 30 over 100, well, I could do that too, 30 over 100, and multiply by my 10, which is 10 over 1. That will give me 300 over 100. And if we simplify that, that's the number 3. So what happens if we want to find out what percent one number is of another number? I showed you an example earlier with the apples, how we wanted to figure out that 3 apples equaled 60% of the total of 5 apples that we have. Sometimes in word problems, it can be a little bit confusing to understand which is the part and which is the whole, because sometimes the numbers are not in order, or sometimes it's phrased in a way that can seem confusing. One easy way to keep this in order is to remember the phrase is over of. That means that whatever number comes sometimes before or after the is going to be on top, but always whatever number comes after the of is going to be your whole. So if we look at this particular problem or example, the number 50 comes after the word of. That means that it's going to go on the bottom of this fraction. And 30 comes after the word is, so it goes on the top of this fraction. So what percent is 30 of the number 50, or what percent of 50 is 30? Well, it's as simple as doing 30 divided by 50. You'll notice that this is basically the same problem if we simplify our fraction. It's the same as 3 over 5. So when we do the math, that gives me 0.60 or 60%. Last, let's take a look at a couple of word problems. So in this problem, we have if 35 out of 50 students passed the test, what percentage of the students passed for this particular class? This problem seems to give me 2 numbers, so I'm trying to figure out what percentage 35 makes up of the number 50. So we're going to use some of those skills that we just talked about. Look at is over of. And I can see that there's not really a word like is, was, be, or something like that, but I do have of 50 students. So because the 50 comes after my of, the 50 obviously has to be my whole here. That's the total number of students in this particular class, or that's taking this test. So that means that 35 represents the part of that particular whole. If I go ahead and do some of this math, I'll do 35 divided by 50, which gives me the number 0.70. Multiply that by 100, and that's 70%. So in this way, I can tell that 70% of the students pass this test. Alternatively, here's another problem where now I've been given a specific percentage. I just want to know what 10% is of this given amount. So here, I have a company had a revenue of 500,000 last year. If 10% of that amount was the company's profit, how much profit did it make? Well, this one's pretty straightforward. I can tell that of 500,000, but I'm not comparing 2 numbers here. Instead, because I've been given a percentage, I can just go ahead and multiply. 500,000 times 10%, which, remember, we can either express as a decimal, which is 0.10, or I can multiply by the fraction 10 over 100. Either way, this will give me 50,000. as I do the math. So often, I particularly like to use the decimals, especially if you use a calculator. Your calculator is typically going to express these percentages as decimals, and things will go a little bit quicker once you recognize that your percentages only go up to your hundredths place with your decimals. So if you recognize that 10%, for example, is 10 going to the hundredths place, or 15% is 0.15, you can do the mental math a little bit quicker. But all in all, there are multiple ways that we can go about figuring out these percentages. In further videos, I'll go into more depth about other things that we can do with percentages and more advanced problems. Take a look at those when you're looking to level up your skills. That's it for now.